Hello and welcome to the Dakota Interviews. I'm Clay Jenkinson, a scholar here at Bismarck State College. We're interviewing remarkable North Dakotans to try to get a sense of the mood of the state as the second decade of the 21st century begins. My guest today is Robert W. Harms, who is the chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party. He's also the owner of the Harms Group, a government relations and public affairs firm specializing in energy development. Welcome, Robert Harms.
Thank you, Clay. Glad to be here.
Really glad you're here. So, you get to be the chairman of the Republican Party at one of the great moments in party history.
Well, it's true. There's a lot of exciting things going on in North Dakota, as you know, and being in the middle of the political arena, the chairman of the Republican Party, I think has been it's been fun, and I think there's lots of opportunities to share views with the public, learn from them, and maybe help fashion the direction that our state and the political climate may take in the coming years. So I'm pleased to be there.
But the party is dominant.
It is.
And there are times when there's a sort of a rough parity between the two parties in North Dakota. Occasionally the Democrats come to the fore, but at the moment there is a very significant dominance of the Republican Party.
The Republicans do dominate North Dakota politics. As you know, basically every statewide office is held by a Republican. Our entire congressional delegation is held by Republicans, except for our lone U.S. Senator, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, and the Republicans have supermajorities in both the House and the Senate. And that creates some challenges of its own.
Why is it, do you think, that the people of North Dakota, of which there are about 700,000 now, are so confident that the Republican Party should have this much control over the future of the state?
Well, I'm speaking for a lot of people as the chairman, and so, as the chairman, I have to reflect on that a little bit. And I do believe that the Republican elected officials, and I make the distinction between the party and the elected officials because the party is the structure, the organization that helps get them elected, but really has no control over the policy decisions that they make. But I do think that the public has responded to the policies and the ideals of the Republican philosophy generally.
So let's go back. You grew up in western North Dakota, where?
I grew up in Tioga, born and raised. Went to high school there. Small town when I got out of high school in 1973. About 1,400 people. And everybody knew everybody else, knew what car you drove, knew what time you got home at night. And my mother was a widow, divorced woman, and so I grew up essentially in a single parent household. Couple of brother and a sister, and I'm the baby in the family.
What was it like in Tioga in 1973?
Really, it was almost like American graffiti in a lot of ways. I mean, I loved growing up there. Graduated with a high school class. I think we had 53 in our high school class, and we lived on the edge of town, a block away from high school. Literally, I could run out the back door, jump over 2 hedges, and be in the back door of the school in about 60 seconds. And so as a kid, you could walk 1 block with a .22 rifle, go out, spend the day, go for hunting. You could ride your bike wherever you wanted. You get up in the morning, 8 o'clock, go down and play baseball. That's growing up as a youngster, and then when you get to high school, we had our own cars and lots of freedom that way. And American graffiti is very much like what I grew up in. People, you'd spend the evening on a Friday or a Saturday night basically driving up and down Main Street just like you did in Dickinson. Down another street, everybody turn around, you'd spend the night doing that, and your mother would ask you what you did. I just drove around and basically spend 3 hours doing that, listening to 8-track tapes. And
gas was 37 cents per gallon.
39.9.
Put in $1 worth of gas and drive for the evening.
Yeah, and worked at the local gas station and learned how to change tires and change oil and go out and do the windshields, the whole thing.
To what extent how do the 60s matter to you, and how did they touch your life?
Well, the 60s for me were the idyllic nature of Tioga, I think, remained. We had a couple of episodes that touched our family. I had a brother-in-law that in 1968 he went to Vietnam, and I had an uncle. He too, my mother's youngest brother, he too went to Vietnam. Both of them came back, and I had a brother that was essentially drafted. He never got to Vietnam, but so we had some experiences. The Vietnam War was probably the most prominent thing for us. You know, you could see the culture, the drug culture, music was evident in Tioga, and you know, I think throughout North Dakota, probably in a lesser degree than it was in some of the larger markets, LA and Minneapolis. I wouldn't really know that, but you know, you could see some indicators of that in Tioga. But I think probably the 60s, we had a little bit of the drug culture in town. Not very prominent. You know, if you were in high school, you kind of knew where the drugs were and where the music was. But I think the most dominant thing in the 60s for me and our family, I think, was the Vietnam War, and that we had family members going off to a war that you know, the country was struggling with, and we saw it on national news every night at 5:30. You know, so that was pretty dominant.
But music, what were your musical favorites in this time?
Well, I think in the 60s, I mean, you know, the Beatles were really they were my entry to rock and roll, I think, and just about you know, the Box Tops, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and so I grew up with a jukebox, Elvis Presley, Blue Suede Shoes, any one of the old country music, you know, Ernie Tubbs, Roy Orbison, all of that. That's what I grew up with, and still like it today, much to the chagrin of my two sons and my wife sometimes. But
Do you think that's true, Robert? That those influences matter that much? I mean, it seems to me, and I don't know you very well, but you seem to me to be, your core values are essentially Republican and could never be Democrat.
Well, I think that's true. What you just described, I think your core values, but I think they're framed biologically, but also by your environment. Now, you know, if I had grown up in Gunther Harms's household, I think I would have been influenced by his thinking, and that would have been it would have been ingrained in me over the years. But instead, I grew up in my single mother's household in the 1960s. I mean, I was the only kid. I mean, she was divorced when I was in second grade. I was the only kid I knew in grade school whose parents were divorced.
Divorce was very rare then.
It was, and so she's a single woman running a restaurant, a truck stop restaurant by herself, raising 3 kids. So she and you know, welfare and public support was not something that she had ever even thought about. You know, she had her own business, she worked hard, she took care of her own, and so I grew up with that kind of model or role model that, and I think that influenced a lot of, you know, my thinking today.
But your mother sounds like a really remarkable woman.
Yeah, you know, she has an 8th grade education, and I think and she's still alive today. She's 83.
Where is she?
In Tioga. Yeah, I've always been impressed by her determination, her ability to work hard, and you know, she's had kind of some challenges of her own, but yeah, I think pretty remarkable woman. And then when I got out of law school, actually, one of the, and you know, part of my interest in public policy, the North Dakota Highway Department changed the viaduct. When you come north on Highway 40, you got to come over the railroad tracks. Well, they were going to do a realignment of the highway, and the Highway Department decided that the gas station that sat right there on when you come over the viaduct, you're going to take a left to go into town. That gas station used to sit up on the little knoll on the north side of the street that you come into Tioga on, and very, very successful business. And the DOT decided that they were going to condemn that gas station, you know, one of the few thriving businesses in the late 80s in Tioga. And so anyway, long-winded answer to your question, that it's not there any longer. I represented my old workmate in a lawsuit with North Dakota DOT as what they were going to pay him. We won the case, and I think he was pleased with the results. But yeah, it's no longer there, and DOT took the building down and took a piece of the property, and frankly, I think it's a great place for a gas station even now. But
you, I mean, I think I hear you saying that part of your political reaction to government intrusiveness is born in this incident, that here was this station doing well in a good spot, and suddenly the government, in this case North Dakota government, rolls in and says no. That's what you don't like.
No, and I think now if the engineers at DOT were here, they'd say, well, we needed a piece of the infrastructure in order to have the alignment, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But if you are the mayor of Tioga in the late 80s and the economy is what it is and not a lot going on, the 3 or 4 jobs that gas station provides and the economic activity that it provides is important to you. And so the decision, in my mind, could have been, we can adjust things. We could have a construction easement sufficient to where we could do the construction work that we'd want on the highway and still leave the business in place. And and that's really how I got involved in politics in a real way, was back in the 80s, because like I said, I was running a small business, and then I would see things happening in Bismarck that affected my business. And I wasn't happy about that, what the decisions that were being made in Bismarck were having an effect on my bottom line. That's not what I thought my government should be doing.
One more question, Bob, about Tioga. When you were growing up there, you must have known that this was the historic epicenter of North Dakota's first oil boom, and that boom was gone. What was your sense of oil growing up in Tioga?
When I was, I think, a junior in high school, sophomore, junior in high school, we had kids that whose parents worked for Amarada or Amarada Hess, and they did a layoff, and I think it was in about 1971, and so lots of fathers in Tioga lost their jobs, and so you were playing football with kids whose dads weren't going to work anymore, or were looking for different jobs, and so I'd had a personal experience with friends whose dads lost their jobs, and so I had a sense of the industry. I didn't have a larger sense of kind of a macro perspective that I acquired later on through professional activities, but so I didn't know really how we played in the national market or the world market or that kind of thing. But it certainly had a sense that Tioga was the oil capital, and that Williston wasn't the oil capital. They wanted to be, but Tioga was, and Minot had nothing to do with oil. And Stanley, everybody knew that there was no oil in Montreal County, at least at the time.
Could you have imagined that at some point western North Dakota was going to become one of the great carbon fields of the world, and maybe there would be hundreds of thousands or even 1 million barrels out of here?
Yeah. No concept of that ever. Certainly not as a kid growing up there, and even later as a young professional who came back in 1980 and had a law practice, and in that boom, as busy as that was, no sense that western North Dakota would be as big as it is today. No, and frankly, I don't think anybody did. I think I know, as an example, Harold Hammond. Harold and I have had dinner together, and we've visited and had business together, and I don't even think Harold had an idea. I mean, I think he might have begun to see this after some of the first wells, but I don't think even the guys in the oil industry understood how large a resource this was 6-8 years ago. And some of my business, what I'll do is I'll introduce people and educate them about what the Bakken is like, and I use the example. Typically we'll be at a restaurant having dinner, and there will be refreshments there, and I'll describe for them that a traditional oil well is a traditional oil play is simply we're trying to take a straw and put it into that coffee cup and that glass of Coke and this bottle of beer. And
you're not sure where they are.
That's well. We kind of have an idea based upon geological, geophysics, that two-dimensional stuff that we've seen, and we're probably at best we might get, we might win 40% out of the time, maybe 50 if we're lucky. But I said now, the difference is all of those vessels are sitting on this table, and the table is the Bakken. And now we know that table is there, and we know it covers a certain expanse within western North Dakota and eastern Montana, and we kind of know where the edges are that will be profitable. And I said, so now all we do is we just go down to that table and we turn our drill bit and we drill 2 miles and continue to keep it inside the table. And so that's really conceptually the difference between what we're doing now.
Do you remember the moment, sometime between 2004 and 2006, say, when you realized that this was going to be gigantic? Do you have is there a sense when you realize, oh my goodness, this thing is going to be bigger than anything that we could ever have anticipated?
No, and I wish I did.
Why?
Because I would have shifted course a lot sooner than I did. Yeah, I mean, I knew the Bakken development, and I remember the shift in my career happened in 2003, and we can talk about that a little bit. But I didn't. I mean, I understood the Bakken probably in 2008 maybe, but I didn't have as keen a sense, 2007, 2008, but I didn't have as keen a sense. But again, I don't know that a lot of the industry did at that time. I think by 2009, I think then I began to understand, and I remember a meeting that I was at. I think I was still doing some contract work for the governor in a Western Governors meeting, and one of the senior executives from Shell told me that that is a bona fide resource play now, and how it will be developed is very different. And this was I think in a meeting in D.C. We were having large national policy, energy policy debates, discussions, and that kind of struck me. That senior executive from Shell was saying that, but the wealth that this is making for our statewide, to taxpayers, for the public coffers, to businesses in Grand Forks and Fargo and Devil's Lake and Bismarck, it is mind-boggling.
You seem like a pretty level-spirited person. Is there any moment where you were just consumed with gold rush mania, where you were feverish to somehow figure out where you could be in this story?
No. Not at all. And I'm not very. I want to be careful about this because hindsight is 2020. But I do think that we've made the mistake of creating that kind of culture, and I think it's hurt our state. And I think we've created that kind of gold rush mentality that I don't think serves us well. And I do get concerned about irrational exuberance. You know, the oil industry itself, the resource, the ability to develop it, get it to the market, that I have absolute confidence in. But some of the other evolutions that are around that industry, I'm a little concerned about.
You're sort of moving into some very, very interesting ground here. But you said that the gold rush mentality, the fever, the mania, is something that you have some concern about, and you said that we've created. If we could back up, and you were in charge of the universe, not just in charge of the Republican Party, how would you have advised North Dakota to absorb this mighty news and to do it in the most responsible possible way?
Well, I think, you know, again, hindsight, but you know, we aren't the first state or culture or economy that has gone through rapid, huge changes, and I think we, you know, maybe we didn't recognize that soon enough, but I think that we may have and may still benefit from looking at other economies, states, localities that have gone through that kind of economic explosion, and how do you address it in a thoughtful way. Now, the free market guy in me would say, "Oh, that's, you know, it sounds like you're talking about regulation." No, I'm really not talking about regulating it. I'm talking about how do we bring people, how do we get better information to the people that are involved? How do we help the industry plan more efficiently? You know, and I think the state's done a pretty good job in terms of, I mean, maybe not as good as I would have liked, but helping the industry and the public understand what's taking place. You know, I mean, Lynn Helms does a marvelous job of talking to the public, helping the public understand. He'll answer questions and interviews, and he, you know, does a great job in that regard.
Okay, so we're definitely wealthy.
Yeah.
And we have this money. You're saying a couple of things. One is that if you open that tap, you sort of create an illusion of infinite funding, and there may not be accountability. How can we target this money in these water projects, in education, in public buildings, and everything else, to have the evaluative certainty that you want? What's missing?
I think whether you're a local elected official, you know, asking yourself, you know, is there a better way for us to do this? If you're the mayor of Bismarck, asking yourself, you know, we did it like that 2 years ago, and it worked then. But to get out of the box and maybe create some systems, some process internally within local government to look at things from a more critical perspective. So I think that's one thing. I think within the political parties, they could do the same. The fact that this, back to your earlier point, this is one of the largest world resources that we're developing, and so it's a new paradigm that we're facing, and so we need new paradigms. We need new thinking and new approaches, because this is bigger and different than something that we've ever dealt with. And so we can't just say, okay, well, we built a highway last year, let's build another one this year and just build it faster and bigger, or faster or longer, or, you know, maybe we shouldn't build it at all. Maybe we should relocate it. Maybe we should do something completely different and not have a road there anymore.
It sounds good, and I'm with you on this, but you surely get it that these are good and decent people who are scrambling to respond to emergency situations. Alexander, North Dakota, overwhelmed with traffic. Build us a bypass. We can't afford it. We need daycares. We need new schools. Our fire department is inadequate. We have to have water. there are these emergencies. These are not just desirabilities like building a new arts center on Main Street. These are urgencies. And these towns are saying, help us.
Yeah. Well, and I'm with them in terms of some of that urgent need. You know, the bypass as an example. I mean, I've driven through Alexander, and the idea now, some might regret the day that a bypass was built.
100 years from now.
Or maybe less than that, you know, thinking, man, I sure like to have that traffic coming back through town. But, you know, I get that, and I don't disagree with that, and I don't disagree with the bypass around Watford City. I mean, I've sat at the intersection of Watford City and waited to, you know, 5, 6, 10, 15 minutes to make a right-hand turn or left-hand. I get all that and don't disagree with anything that we've done in terms of those bypass and that kind of thing. And understand the need for having a fire truck that can respond to an oil field fire, and that I get all of that. And to answer your question, one of the things that I think, and we can still do that, and that is to help provide some training, some education, some work experience, practical day-to-day experience for those local elected officials. I mean, so I'm a 30-year-old lawyer, moves back to Watford City, and I become mayor in 2010. I mean, I don't know anything about what this thing means to me. So, I mean, I would benefit even today from having some, whether it's the Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties or the League of Cities or the Governor's Office or whomever, you know, convene some training sessions from time to time to help me understand, you know, how can you address these kinds of needs? What are some of the things that you should look out? And frankly, none of those. I mean, Ward Kosher, the mayor of Williston, he didn't have any training for being in this firestorm that he's been in the last 12 years, and because he's a pretty smart guy and he's a good businessman, he managed to struggle through it. You know, in retrospect, he probably would have done some things differently had he, you know, had some insight that he didn't have when he started. But those would be some of the things that we might be able to do to help on the front end.
If I understand your core philosophy correctly, you believe that the market is almost always adequate.
Well, I think the market, well, let me say it differently, and let me say it in a more positive way. I think the market generally responds to the needs that come. Now, I also recognize that it may not respond as quickly as the public would like, and so then the public reacts that we need, fill in the blank, and then there's a political response that the public officials feel political pressure to solve this problem, and sometimes the solution is a short-term fix, but exacerbates the need that they were trying to solve. And so I think, you know, my view is that in the long term, the market will sort that out more efficiently than we can in making a public policy entry into that market response.
20 years from now, or 30 or 40, whenever this is, at some point, we're going to look back. And what do you want to see?
What I'm hoping that in 20 years, all of us can look back and say, we did that correctly. We did it the right way. We followed maybe not the easiest or the quickest path, but the smartest path, and made the best use of the wealth that we are going to enjoy. And so, I mean, from a landscape perspective, when you put an oil well on my land, the site you select will probably be there for 30 or 40 or 50 years. The same is true with all of the other facilities. So I think 20 years from now, I'm hoping that those of us who are still alive and interested in North Dakota's well-being looks back, we can all look back and say, we did that smartly. We weren't so quick to do it. And that's kind of my attitude about this. We don't. My view is that we don't need to do this tomorrow. If we can do it next week and it's better. And I've told people in the oil, I've given speeches to that point. I mean, we can always do it better and smarter and more safely. And if those are standards, I mean, those are standards that I think everybody in the public, the oil industry, statewide would agree to, I think.
If you had to give us a preliminary grade, how we've handled it since 2005 to 2014, how would you assess it so far?
I'd give us a C.
A C, average. That's pretty critical for someone in your position.
Yeah, no, I think we could have done better in a lot of arenas. I do.
Well, name a few. Just, I mean, water supply was one.
The producers, my friends like Harold Hamm, would see this differently. But I think the pace of the development itself, I mean, that's something that results from the drilling permits that the state of North Dakota issues. And you know, we've had some policy changes now with regard to flaring, and I think the state's, going to see a closer connection to oil well development and infrastructure more closely aligned to that development. I think you'll see that. I've mentioned, you know, the creation of this gold rush mentality, and that's a result of a host of factors. The rate at which drilling permits are issued, the reaction. What I've said is, I think the wrong public policy decisions that we've made. But to answer your question, how might we have done better? I think allowing some of the market to make those course corrections, I think, would have simply slowed the pace.
So I'm hearing two government responses. It would have been possible for the state of North Dakota, the Industrial Commission and so on, to say, we're going to do 1,500 wells per year, or 7. They could have decided that there's a limit to how much we can absorb. That really hasn't been in place. Would you be in favor of their having moderated this some?
Well, I wouldn't pick a number. What I would have picked was a policy that required some, and I understand, and here's another benefit. So some in the oil industry might rail at what I'm saying right now, but the mineral owners, I think, would have probably benefited from a little slower pace as well. Well, why do you say that? As an example, so if I come to you and I lease 100 mineral acres from you in McKenzie County, and I lease that from you in 2008, and we have a 3-year lease, well, I'm going to do everything in my power to get an oil well drilled on those 100 acres within that 3-year period.
To hold the lease.
That's right, because I don't want to buy it a second time. But if I had to buy it from you, if I didn't get that well drilled in that 3-year period, and I had to come back and I paid you again in 2012, the price would have probably been a little higher, significantly higher, probably 10 times higher than you leased to me in 2008. Or you might have even said, you know, I've watched some of my friends in the oil industry, and I've decided to be your partner. And as a result, you would have retained 5 or 6 times the revenue from your family's minerals that you would otherwise. And so the amount of wealth that would have stayed in North Dakota and retained by North Dakota mineral owners would have been higher. Back to your question about 20 years from now, you know, the wealth is one thing, but thinking about this in a critical way and recognizing that this is a new paradigm, this is a new challenge, and that we've got to take our old thinking, set it off to the side for a minute, and evaluate what we're doing and whether we should have different systems to apply to a new challenge.
So now when the Castleton derailment fire catastrophe happened, luckily it didn't kill people, and it could have been much worse if it had been in Bismarck or Minneapolis or Fargo or West Fargo. But when that happened, you said publicly that this should make us step back a little and think about this, and maybe there were some things we wanted to do more carefully. And when you said that, you got some pretty serious political pushback and some rebuke.
Yeah.
Why did you do it? Did you expect the reaction, and what do you make of it?
Yeah. Well, first, probably a media misstep on my part, because when understand that I've worked in the industry, I grew up in Tioga, I've been invested in the industry, worked for companies in this industry for years, and have spoken publicly about the industry for years as well. In that interview, Republican, politics, party, chairman, we never talked about that. I may have missed that cue on the front end, but so why I said it, I was reacting, and this is, I guess, where I'm at. I'm a North Dakota citizen first and foremost. The Republican Party is a vehicle, is an end, is a means to an end. I'm an advocate and a fan of the oil industry, but it's just an industry. It's just a business, so in the end, I was more. I guess my point in saying that is, I care about my state and the state that I've grown up in, and that I'm intending to live in until probably the day I die, and so I'm interested in the state's well-being long term. But I've also recognized that what I said in that interview was that this was a wake-up call for us, and frankly, Harold Hand essentially said the same thing this summer at the Williston well basin.
So we can't let these things happen. It'll shut down the industry.
Williston Basin Well Conference essentially said, we have another episode, and this industry is going to be in big trouble. He said it in a little different way, but that was essentially his message. That was kind of what I was saying, that we need to stop and slow down and figure out what we're doing so that we can be safer and not put the public at risk. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I will defend that to anybody within the industry and in my party today. Now, the reaction within the party, how
bad was it?
It really wasn't all that bad, to be honest. The headline was, Chairman of the Republican Party calls for a slowdown of the oil industry. Well, the headline was really what caught the news, as opposed to the story itself. And I think the Fargo Forum editorialized a couple days later that what Harms was saying sounded like perfectly reasonable in this, what we're doing. And nothing is going on out there is so urgent that we can't stop, slow down, see if we should be doing it differently and doing it more safely. And I'm okay with that. If I had said something really outlandish or inappropriate, then I would have maybe had to rethink my whole role and maybe even think about stepping down. But none of that was outlandish. None, I wasn't saying things that lots of other people in North Dakota thought as well. And I made some comment about that people need to understand that they're operating in people's front yards, and they damn well better to understand that. And that's still my view.
When you drive through western North Dakota today, what do you think of the industrialization of North Dakota's landscapes?
Yeah. Well, I'm of a mixed mind on that issue, because I'm thrilled in a lot of ways because of the fact that we do have a growing economy, and we have prosperity, and we have people that can do things that they've never dreamed of, and to provide for their kids and their grandkids that in a way that they never imagined that they were going to be able to. And all that's good. In some regard, we can't control all of it because it is private property. It is what our country is founded upon, and that is capitalism and investment and building stuff and resource development and all those things. So that's going to occur in Western North Dakota, whether you hate it or you love it. It's going to happen. And so my answer would be I guess in three pieces. One, I am thrilled in a lot of ways because of all the positive attributes that it brings. Two, we can't control all of it because of the other things that I just mentioned. But three, it will be disheartening if we don't do it the right way.
So 90% of the minerals, or at least or more, willing buyer, willing seller, you're very cautious about getting involved in that sacred exchange, that contract.
Yeah.
What can we and what should we save?
Well, I think the Attorney General's special places concept was a good start, and I think that we should continue to have that conversation. You know, and I go back to, because this is a conversation I've been having for 20 years. I go back when I was working for Schaefer, and he had what was called Badlands 2020. Mm-hmm. We're 6 years from that. But, and part of what we talked about with the environmental community, the conservation community, people that were wanting wilderness in North Dakota, was a recognition that 95% of North Dakota would agree that we don't need an oil well here and here and here. Now, so that conversation has been underway for 20 years in North Dakota, and I do think that far and above half of North Dakota would agree with the sentiment that there are parts of our state that we just don't need an oil well on. And the beauty of the evolution of the technology is, that's right, and we can reach the resource without having the well in those places, those special places that Stensham tried to begin having a conversation about. So, and I guess me personally, on my phone I have a picture that I took off the front step of our house on Sakakawea, and Sakakawea in my mind is one of the state's most precious resources. You know, the Badlands, Sakakawea, the whole river valley, Little Missouri area, all of that. Those are just marvelously beautiful places, and we should take care of them. And we can do that by the reach that the industry has managed to develop, where we can get to the resource from 2 miles.
Why is there such immediate hostility and recoil from industry and some North Dakota government officials when the Attorney General does that, do you think?
Well, I think maybe it wasn't rolled out very as well as it could have been. I think there was some misunderstanding, and I think the AG's shop may have overshot the mark, because I think they got into some areas that were fully private surface, private minerals, and some were going, why should the state, prevent me from development? And I abided by that. I respected that concern. And this is the value of having the conversation. I had a conversation with one of the major producers just this week about the Elkhorn Ranch. And I was talking to them about the view shed, and I'm not much of a view shed guy. Because out here we can see a long ways. But I also respect the fact that there are some view sheds from certain places that you should at least look at. And this company was open to the discussion about, I mean, I wasn't urging that they not develop the resource, but I was asking them to at least flip the design of their well bore and put the well locations north of the Elkhorn Ranch unit in a place that we thought that maybe that would be less visible and they could still reach the two sections. And I think the companies that are better at recognizing that and better at being of not just saying that they're good neighbors, but practicing good neighbor stewardship are going to get better landowner cooperation. They're going to get easements more readily from landowners to build pipelines so we have less flaring, all of that. And so that conversation that Wayne started, the Attorney General started, or continued with at special places, I think reverberates within the industry and I think is helpful.
There have been a lot of spills, little spills, mostly little spills.
Yeah.
Hundreds of little spills, a couple of big ones.
Yeah.
Nothing catastrophic, but some significant spills.
Yeah.
Is this the cost of doing business, or how concerned should we be? Can we overreact to the spill stories?
Well, I think we can overreact to the spill stories, but no, I disagree with the premise that that's just a cost of doing business. I do. This idea that, oh, well, it's, you know, we're going to have accidents out there and, oh, we're going to kill people and we're going to have spills, that is not, I don't think that's a standard that most people in North Dakota, and I think you could put every CEO in every major company in the state in this room and they would agree with it. That's not the standard that Marathon embraces or Stat Oil or Continental Resources. That's not their corporate ethic. That, oh, well, we're going to have, no, they want to do things the best possible way they can, and so I don't think that's an acceptable standard to them and to the public. But this, and I go back to Harold Ham's comment this summer at the Williston Basin Well Conference. That is, if we have one event, and here's the event that I fear most in North Dakota, short of some kind of a rail incident in a population center, and that is an event on Lake Sakakawea. And if we have an event on Lake Sakakawea, there will be another paradigm shift, and the industry should do everything possible to avoid an incident on that lake. With
a gold rush, you get the whole gold rush mania camp follower situation. Yeah. So we have drug gangs, drugs, prostitution, even sex trafficking in North Dakota. Again, one could overreact, but how serious do you regard the social dislocation effect? Very seriously. I mean, I've talked to people in the Attorney General's office, BCI, Sheriff of Montreal County, Williams County. We have some serious bad people in western North Dakota. I mean, it's still a great place to live, and like I said, I'll be sleeping in Williams County tonight. I'm not sure what time we'll get there, but I'll be sleeping there tonight. But we have guns that live in our house, and both my wife and I know how to use them. And I've talked to law enforcement. I don't know if you've ever met Kenny Halverson, the sheriff of Montreal County. Kenny Halverson, he wears a big black cowboy hat. He's about 220 pounds, and he's got a hand about twice the size of either of ours. And when he shakes your hand, he gives you a little pull, to see if how stable you are. And he's a big, burly guy, and he's been the sheriff since I was in high school, and he's not afraid of anything. But he's cautious when he stops a car in Montreal County, in his county these days, and he told me that 2 months ago. From a policy perspective, I don't know if we could have done anything different. Changes, things that we might put to task to manage that. I think there's lots of things that we can do, whether it's on the federal side, task forces and local law enforcement, more money to the Attorney General's office, all of that. And as a fiscal conservative, I have no reservation about spending money in that arena at all. We have an 11.5% extraction tax.
That's right.
And that comes to X $100,000 or $1 billion per year.
Right.
30% of that is taken immediately and put into a permanent legacy fund.
That's right. The primary purpose of what we were trying to do is to guard against a future spending shortfall, because we were spending oil and gas revenues. Eventually will come to a halt someplace, sometime in the future. That revenue stream will begin to decline. And so the principal purpose of the legacy fund is to essentially replace that revenue stream when it begins to decline. After 2017, then the earnings become available to the general fund, and they become then subject to the budgeting process and review and competition for other ideas. So that's where the revenues go after 2017. At that time also, and we wanted this sort of a mechanism in case there was some unforeseen event, if there's a cataclysmic issue or some asserted reason within the legislature that they need to tap the principle of that fund, they can do that, but it takes 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. And it was designed really to be a safety valve in case there's some catastrophic event within the state where we needed revenues. We didn't want to have that banked and no
You
means
can get at it. Takes 2/3.
Yeah, and so there'll have to be a political explanation or justification made that this savings account should be invaded and part of the principal should be taken. So that's essentially what the legacy fund should do. And my hope for it, one of the things that we looked at when we were designing was Wyoming, a number of years ago, they have a similar fund, and Wyoming does a couple things with their fund, as an example of what we might do. One, they pay 25% of the cost of general government with the earnings from their fund. The other thing they do is any kid who grows up in Wyoming, graduates from high school in Wyoming, and wants to go to college in Wyoming, has cost-free tuition to a Wyoming institution paid for from that fund.
Tuition free to
Yeah.
any Wyoming resident who wants to go to a Wyoming university.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Would you favor that here?
You know, I would, that concept generally appeals to me, that I'd like to have some metrics attached to it so that we have people who are serious about getting educations, and then I'd like to have some metrics on the delivery side to make sure that we have people that are delivering the education product for those students are the best that we can get into North Dakota.
So here's a different sort of question. Alaska announces periodically it's divvying up all the money, no property taxes, everyone gets cash. It's like winning the lottery. I take it you don't think that would be a good use of our wealth?
I think that would be a terrible policy, and I would do everything I can to resist that.
But of course that's a very attractive idea to lots of people. Why would you resist it?
Well, because the fundamental reason is because it promotes the idea that we as citizens of the United States are somehow entitled to something that we didn't pay for. You know, we can talk about Social Security and whether we get a good investment back, but we know at least we put that money in. But it promotes the idea that I think is detrimental to our society as a whole, that Americans can acquire something that they didn't earn. So for us to create a program where the people of North Dakota would get a check from Sugar Daddy North Dakota, I think runs counter to what I think is fundamental to our society, to our country.
So let's talk about that in a bigger way. You've been associated with the Tea Party movement to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Where are you exactly? What's your baseline philosophy of where America is and where it's headed?
I mean, I think we're in trouble, I think.
Deep trouble?
Yeah, I think so.
Why?
Well, I think that because largely probably the two greatest concerns I have for our country is the national debt and the policies and the politics that have generated that national debt, and our unwillingness to address it. And I mean both Republicans and Democrats alike. So that's one overriding concern, is the national debt. And then the other concern really is the one that we're struggling with right now, and this is international terrorism, the radical Islamic terrorists that that is a real concern to me, and what we're doing to protect ourselves. And we live in a different world today, and I think that's something we, and now, having said that, I think we're in deep trouble. Where are we going? And this is the confidence that I have. A few years ago, I started teaching a class for high school students, once a week or so. It's called We the People, and it's a nationwide program.
That's a great program.
It's a great
right.
program. And you get around these 10, 12, 16 high school students who know more about how the Constitution was founded and the arguments and debates that the Founding Fathers went through, and your spirit of Americanism and the hopes of our country in the future is renewed. And so we're in serious trouble, but I also believe that we will come back. We will rebound, and we will respond appropriately. We may have to have a black eye or two, and we may take some lumps along the way. But I think we'll correct the course of our country, both in the national debt perspective, and I think we'll address this Islamic radicalism, I think, appropriately.
Is this the best thing that ever happened to North Dakota?
We'll see.
Do you worry?
Sure, absolutely.
Do you worry? I mean, obviously there are all these problems, and we can agree on those.
Yeah.
But do you worry about the character and the identity and the soul of North Dakota? What will be in 2040, 2060? What's your concern there?
Well, I do. I shared this with the governor a couple of years ago about the transformation, the culture, not only the economic transformation that's underway, but the cultural transformation that's underway in our state, and it is truly underway. And so I do have concerns about the fabric of where we are and what we'll be like in 20 years. And so you asked me the question, is this the best thing that ever happened in North Dakota? I certainly all of the wealth, that's a wonderful thing, and if we use it and we manage it well, the answer to that should be a resounding yes, but it has some conditions attached to it. And I'm thinking about, well, somebody else is saying, well, what else would be better for North Dakota than what has happened with regard to the oil development, and I don't have an answer to that, so I'd have to say probably this is the best thing that has happened to us.
We've been talking with Robert W. Harms, who is the chairman of the Republican Party, also the owner of the Harms Group, which is a consulting company for mostly oil and energy related subjects. We have just scratched the surface of what could be a very long and fruitful conversation. I've had the greatest time listening to your views about the history and the future of North Dakota. I'm Clay Jenkinson. I'm the director of the Dakota Interviews Project. We'll see you next time.